This occurred only 12 months ago. When it comes to the music industry, my friend Jimmy is pretty active and has a lot of contacts. In particular, when I say music community, I mean the East Coast dance, electronic music scene, which is centered on New York and New Jersey. Actually, what he and his team have achieved in only 2 years is rather remarkable. Here is the main point. At prestigious locations, their business holds what they term events. In most cases, the city's most famous nightclub or event venue. Then they hire a third party to provide the talent, who is usually a famous or almost famous DJ. While I can't say for sure who they've cast because I'm not very immersed in the scene, I can say that they've included some major names. Okay, enough background. My relationship with Jimmy goes back over 20 years. For the most part, I've known him my whole life, and for the vast majority of that time, he has been my closest companion. This is why he invites me and several other friends from our community to his concerts for free, where we can mingle with the performers in the VIP area. I really should have been more grateful and told them how awesome it is more often. On the Jersey Shore, Jimmy was supposed to organize a massive party the weekend of July 4th. Our common acquaintances were all planning to attend what was to be their most massive event to yet. I went ahead and accepted Jimmy's invitation to come down early, along with our other friend Ryan. We drove for an hour and a half to get to the venue, and we arrived for hours before doors opened. We figured we might as well start drinking early since Jimmy and his crew were setting up, and Ryan and I had nothing else to do. We made sure to take advantage of the venue's generous offer of unlimited free alcohol to Jimmy and his staff. Ryan and I were, to put it mildly, rather hammered. By the time the first DJ began playing, we rationalized our immoral behavior by claiming it was in keeping with the 4th of July weekend. After what seemed like an eternity, Ryan and I were both absolutely spent. Since then, I can't recall a single instance where I was so inebriated. Not even close. Ryan and I are mature adults. We're not afraid to drink. It wasn't the issue that we were making a fool of ourselves by throwing up. The real issue was a lack of self-control and poor decision-making abilities. Whatever the case may be, I do recall that we were thoroughly enjoying ourselves. As the night drew to a close, attendees had to make plans for either their transportation home or their companions, or both. The first problem wasn't an issue because Jimmy had reserved an airbnb nearby and assured Ryan and me that we would have a bed. My focus was squarely on the second issue. We sashayed over to the bar and struck up conversations with a couple of girls we thought were hot. We quickly decided who we would be spending the remainder of the night with. Both of us are over 6 feet tall, yet we're hardly models for Calvin Klein. Being tall is an even greater plus than usual because most Jersey Shore guys tend to be on the shorter side, and for some reason, that appears to be the primary quality that most Jersey Shore girls are looking for. Nothing to do with intelligence, physique, or good appearance, but stature. I won't tell you why. I have not yet mastered the Jerseyan female mind. I think Jana and Marcella are the names the girls use when they introduce themselves, although I could be completely wrong. We meet them at the same point in time when my memory starts to get fuzzy, so there can be gaps in the story going forward. As far as I can recall, Marcella was the one who proposed that we all go together and carry on the celebration somewhere else. Ryan and I were not about to dispute her proposal, despite the fact that we had likely already drunk the fluid equal of her body weight in booze. Jana still demanded that we get down on their level before we left. These females obviously had a lot of money because of the way they looked, but I realized that the entire girls taking drinks from guys thing sounds weird, and it does. The four of us began making our way towards the venue's exit once we finished our drinks. Marcella that we returned to her apartment, which was relatively nearby. The second we stepped outside, to mention being directly on the shore, I was little taken aback by her mentioning that, since the boys were typically the ones to host in these kinds of situations. I was really looking forward to returning to our airbnb. Our airbnb for the night was located in the middle of nowhere, but the girls were adamant that Marcella's beach house was much better. Neither Ryan nor I argued with her since she had a valid point. We strolled down the shore, conversing the entire way, from what I could see from our discussions. The girls were quite bright and well-informed. It was a welcome change of pace from the usual chit-chat with girls about nightlife and other meaningless topics, intoxicated individuals in general, not simply girls. I was ashamed of how intoxicated I was because I couldn't express myself properly, and seemed like a complete moron at one point. It was at that moment that it hit me. I was actually feeling even more inebriated than I had been 15 minutes before. I wasn't used to feeling inebriated, though, under the strain of my weight. My body seemed to be dissolving, at the verge of collapsing at any second, if that makes any sense. My legs felt as weak as cardboard. At one point, I felt a slight numbness in my limbs, and it grew progressively more difficult to move my mouth, eyes, and limbs. But, for the time being, at least, the sensation returned, and normal intoxication resumed. We reached the beach home at that very moment. How utterly maddening. I may be exaggerating due to my intoxication, but it appeared to resemble the mansion of a professional athlete. Upon entering, we removed our shoes and were led to what seemed like a living room. The amount of luxury there was completely out of my league, so I'm just going to have to guess it was ornamental, yet in a simplistic way. The two accounts are diametrically opposed, despite the presence of genuine sculptures. On pedestals, the space exuded an air of understated elegance, and the displayed items blended seamlessly with the walls, as if they were mere extensions of the room. I really wanted to capture this moment with my camera, but I was completely absorbed in something else. Ryan and Marcella vanished into thin air within the first 15 minutes of our arrival, leaving Jana and me to fend for ourselves in this bewildering mansion. My final memory is of her leaning in for a kiss on my lips just before I passed out. She leans in to kiss me, not actually kissing me. At that point, the road ends. No matter what I do, I can't seem to fill the massive void in my memory that lasts for hours. I don't recall feeling lightheaded again, drinking more, or doing anything else. I know I didn't pass out because I sent texts that prove I was still cognizant. So that's the point. I have no recollection of being sentient, yet. There is digital evidence of it. Hold for a second, before you accuse me of merely passing out from drinking. This was different. I almost never pass out, but every time I have, I am able to piece together fragments of the night, little bits here and there, enough to form a coherent storyline, at the very least. Another reason I don't think a general blackout could explain what happened is because there were all instances when I was far drunker than that night. Not only that, but Ryan had the identical experience at about the same time, which is far too precise to be a coincidence. The following is what I recall next. An hour after the event had taken place, I woke up in a random patch of bushes with the sun directly overhead. The fact that my phone was not in my pocket meant that I was unaware of this beforehand. Actually, my pocket was completely empty. Worst case scenario, I lost both my wallet and keys. In the first place, it wasn't even my pocket. Not only was Ryan not wearing his clothing, but I was also wearing someone else's, something that belongs to an unknown individual. My shoes were the only personal property I still had, and they were in a state of disarray. The shoelaces were undone, and both shoes were completely drenched, like I was regaining consciousness. After anesthesia, my mind was racing, and my senses were all jumbled. It took a while for me to even sit up. In an attempt to comprehend my current location, I gazed up at the sky for a while, bushes, the clothing of another person, and the absence of a wallet, phone, and keys. I didn't have the distinct aroma of salt water or chlorine, but my sneakers gave the impression that I had been swimming not long ago. The emptiness was the most frustrating aspect of the entire ordeal. As I mentioned before, I couldn't recall anything after Jana left. Worry began to set in at that point. This was more than a hangover. I was terrified. How I got there is a mystery to me. Just imagine if I'd been involved in an altercation or a vehicle accident. What would happen if I were drugged? For the past 10 hours, I had no point of reference. It didn't look like a beach town, which further frightened me, and when I stood up, I noticed that there wasn't a single landmark around me. The road ahead continued to wind its way into more forests, but a 7-Eleven was conveniently located just across the street, maybe a few 100 feet away. Because it was the sole object visible, I made a beeline for it. I informed the clerk that my phone had been stolen and asked if I may use his instead. He slipped it across the counter after staring at me for a second, perhaps arguing with himself about whether I was attempting to trick him. My sister's number was the first one that sprung into my head. It was the sole number that, aside from my parents, I had committed to memory. Plus, I was absolutely not going to contact my folks. I did my best to explain things to my sister, and she took up the phone immediately. She gave me Ryan's number, and I tried phoning him multiple times, but it didn't work. About that time, I began to wonder if he had experienced the same things that had befallen me. Drugs were stolen and then abandoned in some unidentified bushes an hour distant. Suddenly, Ryan walks into the very same 7-Eleven as I was ready to contact the authorities. Before we wiped each other off, we merely stared at each other. Next, he gave me his side of the tale, and as you might expect, it was virtually identical. We were sold at that point. After expressing our deepest gratitude to the 7-Eleven employee, we contacted the authorities. Just a few minutes later, we find ourselves outside the store. Telling the cops what happened, they did, to their credit, first give our advice their full attention. The more we divulged, though, the more their inquiries shifted. Had we drank too much? Were we sure? Perhaps we slept off somewhere in our wanderings. It was obvious they weren't totally confident anything illegal occurred, but they weren't accusing us either. I told them we probably wouldn't have gone drunkenly, wandering into a town and are away on foot, and I don't think they took well to that comment. I instructed them to contact my sister by providing her with my number. Find My iPhone already had her on my phone. We were all taken aback when my phone suddenly appeared in the midst of a parking lot just a short drive away. We got a ride from the officers. Our phones were, in fact, lying side by side on the sidewalk. It was wonderful to get my phone back, but it simply proved the cops right that we were inebriated. After we lost our phones, they began to imply that we had simply misplaced our wallets and that we had likely not been robbed at all. We attempted to persuade the authorities to examine the residence that Marcella escorted us to, asserting her ownership, but they were unconvinced. Our inebriation, they said, was likely to blame for our hazy memories. Happens more often than you think, added one of them. We were then given our cards and instructed to contact them via phone should any further information be recalled. It was startling that they were so hesitant to even put us in touch with other cops who could lend a hand. They abandoned us after telling us to get a ride home on our charged phones. Things became much more bizarre when I glanced through my phone for the first time after they left. I messaged a large number of people I already knew, several colleagues, my folks, and Jimmy. Heck, I'd even been chatting with a few girls, just your average, everyday fare. If last night had been peaceful and reasonable, I might have uttered these things. The sentences were authentically me, but when taken as a whole, they failed to make any sense due to continuity issues. Our one communication to Jimmy informed him that we had crashed at a friend's apartment and thanked him for the activities. We had located a couch to sleep on and were informed by one to my dad that we were safe. I had another one that was more casual, like I was simply chilling at home and thinking about the lady I had been texting. The texts were completely incoherent and even contradicted one another. I decided to give Jimmy a call after seeing I had a mountain of missed messages and calls from him. Hearing from me made him seem relieved. He had assumed that Ryan and I had perished. Simply remain where you are. He promised to come and get us while this was going on. Ryan and I canceled all of our cards. It's interesting to note that none of them had been used, even though those gals probably had them for a while. On the way home, we couldn't stop speculating about what might have transpired. It was all really confusing. To be sure, we could tell that someone had doped us, however, that failed to clarify matters. To begin, no roofie that I'm aware of produces those results, similar to an induced coma. The only thing I've read about those medications is that they put you to sleep. Again, though, I was aware, the texts attest to that. Also, why would you bother going to all that trouble to rob two unrelated men? This is particularly true if you had no intention of using their credit cards in the first place. Not one, but to men who approached you, and in such a precarious location, no less. As a homeowner, you, alternatively, had they broken into a house, they were both as dangerous. It appeared to Jimmy that someone was trying to find us specifically. However, as previously mentioned, we were the ones who had approached the girls. Thus, it was impossible for them to target us. This doesn't even begin to explain how we ended ourselves in an unknown town in our way, dressed as complete strangers. Despite how ridiculous that sounds, Ryan and I both felt for any cuts or scrapes, assuming that maybe some of our bodily parts had been removed, but that was not the case. Someone had taken us to that place, and it wasn't those girls who had switched clothes with us. Jimmy said that maybe they had merely given us some exotic drugs, which makes sense. Even though we never heard back, we certainly did not ignore the matter. In the end, Ryan and I drove back to the coast solely to search for that house. We did our best to go backwards, since we knew that the house would be located along the boardwalk. Since we were able to locate it on the beach, we climbed the walkway together and rang the doorbell. The door was opened by an elderly man who inquired as to our desires. Not wanting to give too much away or get myself in trouble, I did most of the talking. My only inquiry was whether he knew of any Marcels in the area, or if he had any daughters or granddaughters of a similar age. I made up a ridiculous narrative about a girl who lied about owning this place. After he gave me a firm no, to his surprise, he thought it was really humorous. The end came with that. It would be dishonest of me to claim that leaving that place didn't make me feel queasy and uneasy. There was no terror at all. Rather, there was an eerie unease, as if something terrible had transpired that night between my friend and me, and I would never know what had happened. I thought for a long time after that those females were up to something far bigger, something that Ryan and I couldn't ever begin to fathom, that perhaps, for some reason, they changed their minds about abducting or killing us at the last minute. Even though I know I won't have any updates, I will certainly send something if anything else happens. Hey there, I'm Ariel, and I hail from Georgia, which is really close to Alabama. I went to this little Alabama hamlet for a 4th of July picnic that my college buddy Isabel was hosting a few years ago. The kind of gathering that takes place in a backyard and features an abundance of food, paper plates, and illegal pyrotechnics. It had been a while since I'd had a good night. Pleasant atmosphere, positive vibes, children playing with sparklers, etc. Looking back, my first error was definitely waiting until it was somewhat after 10 to go. Once the sun goes down, the area of the state becomes incredibly peaceful. It would take little more than 2 hours to get home. Back roads made up the bulk of the route. They were lengthy, deserted sections of dimly lit, 2-lane highways bordered by dense forest on either side. On occasion, I might come across a little church with a gravel lot or an abandoned farmhouse, but otherwise, it was mostly pitch black. I was still feeling fantastic after the party, so I had the music turned down low. I won't deny that driving through such areas at night irritates me. Even when there's no valid cause for fear, the fact that I've had a mild phobia of the dark probably contributes to it as well. After about half an hour, I peered into my rearview mirror and saw the headlights. I wasn't very concerned about it at first. Someone else had probably taken the same detour as me, I thought. The more it lingered, though, the more I became aware of it. It was a Nissan Altima in gray. There was nothing out of the ordinary, except that the vehicle appeared to have driven through mud on its undercarriage. Whenever we went through a tiny intersection with one of those overhead lights, I could always make it out. Still, that wasn't particularly strange by itself. However, I soon discovered that the car responded identically to my speed adjustments. I sped up a bit at first since I felt it might be a coincidence. The Altima maintained the same speed, which was perhaps 5 to 10 miles per hour higher than my previous speed. I opted to tap the brakes and let myself to drift much below the limit instead. Once more, the outcomes are unchanged. Our physical separation remained unchanged. Remember that on highways like that, vehicles frequently pass one another. For the most part, it's not even against the law. On a couple occasions, I shifted to the right just a little to make it clear that I was allowing them the room they needed to turn around. However, this was not the case. They did not budge from their position some 6 or 7 car widths behind. I took the decision to test them at that point. A sudden left turn was approaching. What appeared to be a little residential lane had 3 or 4 dwellings strewn over its length. I didn't think twice before making the turn. I wanted to run away from that vehicle as fast as I could. However, the vehicle did in fact turn off and execute the identical left turn in the middle of nowhere approximately 10 seconds afterwards. On that route, their chances of belonging were practically non-existent. There was no longer any doubt in my mind that they were indeed trailing behind me. A terrible nausea washed over me, as if I were really in jeopardy. Maybe I was, but I couldn't be sure. My heart was already thumping in my chest at that point. It would be the same way if I were threatened with physical harm. This is the most straightforward comparison I can think of, although I'm not sure why. In the midst of nowhere, I felt completely powerless. I wanted to get to a public, safe place because I had no clue what that person wanted or why they were holding me. The only things that sprang to mind were terrifying explanations, with illumination and humans. The god-awful beep that signals an almost empty gas tank came on almost at the last possible moment. I have never felt so helpless in my life, I swear to God. My 2012 Corolla has seen better days and has gone through its share of trouble. The gas light gives me 20 miles some days and 10 at the worst. And there isn't exactly a gas station on every corner in that region of the state. I retrieved my mobile device and searched for the closest 24-hour place, over 8 kilometers separated them. I was unsure of my chances of success, but I had no other option. With that automobile still following me, I had no intention of pulling over. I considered contacting the authorities, but I felt it would have been pointless given how far out in the middle of nowhere we were. It takes years for the cops to get anywhere, and I had mixed feelings about whether or not calling the police would make the threat any less serious. Even putting that down on paper makes me feel ashamed of how ridiculous that sounds. To be completely forthright about my feelings, though, is all I'm attempting. Several minutes after that, the gas gauge went down to 0, not merely low and empty. Despite my best efforts, I could feel myself going into a tailspin. It seemed like every sound in the vehicle was amplified. The distance seemed greater. I didn't know how to change my situation, and I felt foolish for being helpless. Going to the gas station was an impossibility. I knew it. The thought of my automobile running out of gas immediately set off a chain reaction of scenarios. Somehow, though, I was able to make out the light of the petrol station sign up ahead. Truthfully, I was on the verge of tears, to tell you the truth. I slammed on the brakes and accelerated into the parking lot all at once so I could get out of the car and book it inside. I went ahead and did that very thing. I leaped out and dashed inside. Just closing the door behind me, looking out the window, I could make out the Altima. It coasted to a halt at the lot's edge and remained motionless for approximately 10 seconds, its motor idling. Despite this, nobody escaped. Whoever was inside seemed to be weighing whether or not to keep after me. To top it all off, it suddenly peeled off, fast, following the path we had originally taken. It vanished after explaining what had transpired. To the gas station attendant, he promised to contact the authorities on my behalf. However, my unease persisted even after our conversation with the authorities. Even if it did happen to someone, I know it wouldn't be the most terrifying thing. Whoever was behind the wheel of the vehicle had evil intentions. It's the only way to explain what happened to me, and that overwhelming sense of terror. I pray that I am never put in a situation like that again. After reaching my destination, I vowed to myself that I would never again brave the dark, remote back roads. This is just the beginning, though. I felt sick to my stomach all over again after something happened a few weeks later. In the evenings, I would sit at home and watch the news. Actually, it's just some ambient noise. Authorities assumed he had left in a stolen gray Nissan Altima, last seen heading east, when a fuzzy still from a security camera showed him in rural Alabama. During a piece about 2 men suspected of armed robbery, attempted murder, and a number of other things, my heart stopped beating the second I heard that. That was the person who had been tailing me. I just knew it. There was no way to confirm if it was the same someone who trailed me that night, But trust me when I say I sensed their presence. Everything was in sync. The time, the place, and the car description were all spot on. It hit me when I informed the police what happened. My own foolishness may have led to the apprehension of two very dangerous individuals. I really do think about the fact that I will never be able to forgive myself for waiting so long to contact the authorities. Neither the police nor the media ever provided me with any kind of update regarding the situation. I will provide an update if there are any changes.